Hello, hello. Hi, I'm Danae, and I am currently celebrating 1 year living in the RV. So, since this is my 1 year anniversary, I figured I would do a little story time of what it was that I lived in before. Since I had filmed all of this on a vertical scale, I figured I would pop a video of me on the other side where I am working on my garden, expanding my vegetables and all that. And while I do that, I'm going to talk to you about what's happening on the right side of the screen. So, this is the room that I lived in for a decade with my now ex boyfriend. I met him in college, and we had a lot of fun together. I had noticed like little red flags towards the beginning, but I kind of just like dismissed it. And he was very charming in the beginning. I found myself very attracted to him. I guess at the time I did not realize that he had a lot of traits of some toxic family members of mine that I just didn't want to recognize until it became more evident and more pronounced, such as aggression. I noticed a lot of narcissistic behaviors that didn't really pick up on right away. Like, this man would call and start screaming at me over little things like, oh, he's at on campus and he doesn't have any money for lunch, and apparently what I had already packed him just wasn't fulfilling enough. He needed to buy something hot from the cafeteria. I need to send him money. I need to send it right away. And this was like before Zelle and Cash App and all those other things, so it's like there's no way for me to do that. And he would just keep calling and screaming at me. And then on top of that, he was an alcoholic. So this is one of his bottles. And I had asked him at one point, like, can you mark these? Because it feels like you're going through them really quickly. And I don't think you're aware of how many shots you take in a day or how much of this you're drinking in a week. So he's marked them, like each dash is a shot and each check is like the end of a day and the start of a day. There were points where he would tell me, oh, I remembered what time you asked me that because I was thinking, is it too early to have a shot? Is Danae going to get mad at me? So those were little indicators that I was like, oh no, he's he's off the deep end. I don't think he's going to get better. And like, there was a point where he had asked me to marry him, and I was like, well, I definitely am not going to marry you if this is where we're living. Like, it was basically like a challenge to him. Like, if you want me to take your request seriously, then we need to get out of this house. So that very, very small, very narrow bedroom was actually a converted Florida room in a 100-year-old house. So the landlord, who is a saint among men, I will say, had let people rent the spaces in this house for very, very low amounts, which is appropriate, because if he charged any more than what he was charging, that's insane, because the house is technically condemned. It's just not known by the government yet. But anyway, it was basically a hoarding situation. So many different people had lived there and just left stuff behind, and the landlord's pretty old, so it's like he couldn't deal with it, and he was also kind of contributing to a lot of it himself, just out of, I don't want to say laziness, but maybe out of habit. So I had tried cleaning this place up and decluttering it so many times, and I was the only one doing that, and it just became such a burden. And it was just like, okay, I cleaned this one space and I come back and like 2 days later there's more stuff in it. So it was pretty challenging for me to live like that. And then on top of that, it's like, where we cooked and where we ate was just like, it's just unsustainable. So the landlord had tried many times to do some renovations, but rightfully so. He was afraid of getting like real people in there, because then they might report the house, and maybe then everyone would get kicked out of said house because it's not in a livable state. But anyway, he never followed through on a lot of his renovations. Like when I first got there, he had pulled up the floor in the kitchen so he could fix the plumbing. Because the plan was like fix the plumbing and then fix the electrical and then put floor in. And then that never happened. So it was 9 years of that. And, like there's no interior walls. So I know that the house had gotten some damage from a hurricane, who knows how many years ago. And it was just between the landlord being neurotic and indecisive, just nothing ever came of it. So this is where I cooked every single day. For 10 years. There is a bathroom a half bath off the kitchen, which was used by multiple people in the house, including a homeless man that the landlord let live in his garage. And it was the second homeless man that he had let live there. The first one was very erratic and had like a mental issue. So he was constantly like cursing people out and yelling and talking to himself, and it was concerning. And then the second one that moved in was constantly leaving excrement all over the toilet seat and not cleaning up after himself. So it was really disgusting. Not to say that the rest of the house isn't disgusting, but it was like just more on top of more on top of more. There were animals that would get in the house. Every couple of days I would smell a dead rat rotting somewhere, or we would hear the rats scuffling around in the space between the kitchen ceiling and I guess the landlord's bedroom, which was above the kitchen. You would just hear the little feet scuffling around, or you'd hear them wrestling together, and then that would prompt the landlord to lay more rat traps. And then again, the smell of a random rat that died somewhere, we would start smelling. There had been raccoons that had gotten into the house, which is it's very appropriate that I say that, because there is a clip that is included in this where you will see a raccoon outside trying to get at the cat food for the kittens that live in the yard. So there was also a time where I really don't know how it got inside, but a giant iguana ended up inside the house. So a lot of this felt like the worst camping experience I've ever had. And I've only gone camping one time in my life, so that says a lot. But like we showered outside because the upstairs shower was not fully supported, like the floor. So I was always concerned that, it was going to fall in, and then the tiles were cracking and leaving shards in the shower. It was just easier to shower outside. I am a bit of a, I don't want to call myself an exhibitionist, but I have gone to nude beaches, and I love the free feeling that I get from laying out in the sun, just, bare as I was when I was born. So I didn't really mind. But when you shower every day, all the time outside, and that little backing that you see on the right behind the shower was not there before. It was just open. The only side that was covered was the left, so that if people were walking around in the yard, they couldn't see you unless they wrapped around the corner to where the laundry line was hanging. Then they could see you. So a hurricane had knocked down the neighbor's fence, and then that backing got put up because there wasn't a fence. But yeah, rain or shine, could have been like there's multiple times where I had to go outside during a hurricane, I kid you not, to shower. Low-key, I do kind of miss that a little bit, because the hot water with the cold torrential rain is actually very therapeutic. But what's not is all the bugs and the lizards and the frogs and then the roaches that would come crawling out of everywhere. So I know there's going to be plenty of people who ask, like, well, how did you end up in this situation? Like, why didn't you leave sooner? I was definitely a victim of circumstance. So I didn't really think much of it when I first, started hanging out with him in this house. I did think it was gross, but I also thought, oh, he's not going to be here forever, having not known how long he had already been there and prior to me meeting him. but also my mom and sister who I lived with, who are also alcoholics. They were giving me a lot of grief because they were going through some financial issues. My sister had just lost her job. My mom was struggling with her business, and I was in college, so I was really just focused on, my education that I had to pay money for. I wasn't really concerned with everything that was going on, and when I was home, my mom would, start yelling at me while drunk, and it became preferred for me to not be at home. So I would either go hang out with friends, or in this case, ended up hanging out with him because he would invite me over, or he'd invite me to his job, and we would just hang out there for a while. And then he'd be like, "Oh, well, since I'm done at work, you want to come over?" And anything was preferred to being berated at home. You know what I mean? So I didn't really think much of the fact that he was playing video games with me, sitting in this squalid little house in this little cramped room playing video games while he's, doing shots of vodka. And I was just thinking, oh, he's just living that college life, I didn't realize it was literally his lifestyle until I ended up in that house. So during that time period, my mom and sister got evicted from where they were living, and I did not know this at the time. So I did harbor a lot of resentment at the fact that it felt like it was their fault that I ended up there for as long as I was. But they basically were like, "Danae, you need to get all your stuff, and since you're always at his house anyway, why don't you just move in with him?" And I was like, "Oh no, I don't really want to do that." So some of my furniture is actually in that house, in the videos, and is still there to this day. Like heirloom furniture that used to be my grandmother's and my birth mother's before that, because my birth mother passed and my grandma kept the furniture. So some of my stuff is still in his house. And anyway, they went through a stint of homelessness, which I did not know about at the time. I found out, some several years later, that both my mom and my sister were basically living in my mom's office suite for a little while. And all I knew was that when they did find some place to live, it was not a place with enough space to accommodate me getting out of that house. And then when my sister ended up buying a house later on, the same situation happened where it's like there wasn't a place for me. And then, I was trying to save up money, and every time I wanted to get out of the house or move, he would say, "Oh no, we can't afford that," or da 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 da, and he would try to get me to spend money on things that weren't important. And he didn't seem to understand that, the savings is for us to get out of here, to get a better life, to do this, that, and the third thing. And he's like, "Oh, well, you have all that money. You can just do whatever you want with it. It's like you're just being stingy, or you're just being cheap, or whatever. I don't have a savings account. Why do you have a savings account?" And it was a challenge. So there were plenty of times where, like, I got into a car accident because a truck hit me, and I was literally in front of my ex-boyfriend at the time. So he saw that the truck hit me and still was like, "Well, what did you do? You shouldn't have done this. You shouldn't have done that. You could have avoided that car crash." Like, thanks. So, like, it was all my fault. And then he would start screaming at me about how was he going to get to work, even though it was the car I was in, my car, was the one that was damaged, and I was making more money than him at the time. So it's like, why aren't you worried about how I'm going to get to my job that pays more, that I've been at consistently for the past 8, 7, 10, whatever years by the time that accident happened? Meanwhile, your job that you just got recently, that you should have left by now because of the conditions. He was a contracted Amazon driver, so it was through like a third party company. The conditions were terrible. I always encouraged him to like get a job that you enjoy, that pays well. But, he was very stubborn, didn't want to listen to any of my advice. And he ended up keeping a job that was more financially draining than it was successful. So in the end, I had gone through a lot of stress to, get a second car, to get whatever. I was always the one with the biggest financial burdens, trying to make everything work, trying to be the adult in the relationship. So yeah, when I found out later about my mom and sister having been homeless and, buying a house and stuff like that where they couldn't fit me in there, anytime that I had like talked to my mom or my sister about, the situation I was in, and like my mom had actually seen the house when we were putting the furniture in it. And I think that because she knew she was about to be homeless for an indeterminate amount of time, she was like, you know what, at least Danae's got a roof over her head. Because I still to this day am like, how was she not concerned about leaving me here, But in the end, what ended up happening is they packed all my stuff in there, and I was not able to figure out a way to get out. Anytime I talked to my mom or sister about it, they would be like, "Oh, well, you should leave him or do this or do that." And it's like, "Oh, well, you can always come stay here and sleep on the couch." And I'm just like, how long is that sustainable? You want me to come sleep on your couch in a house with a bunch of other people in it? Like that. Or I would tell my sister like, "Oh, well, I shower outdoors." She's like, "Well, you can sleep on my couch and I've got a hose in the backyard. It'll be just like there." And I was just like, wow, thank you for all of your love and support. So never took them up on that offer. And then my brother, who is more financially stable, had a girlfriend at the time, and I didn't know this either, but he told me more recently that every time he came to see me and he saw the conditions I was living in, he would leave and he would cry. And I'm like, part of me does not believe that because you don't seem like much of a crier, but okay. And that him and his now ex-girlfriend would like talk about like, what can we do? How can we help her? Blah, 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 whatever. And then they ended up breaking up because one of the things that her complaint was that she didn't want to have to give up her privacy in order for me to come like live near or with them or whatever. So then I took a trip with my brother back to Louisiana to spread my grandmother's ashes. And that was a trip that was very much needed because it gave me time away from a human being that would not give me the time of day to just like unwind, have peace. He was always talking. It was a lot of sensory overload. Like if I was having a bad day and I came home and I'm like, can you just please leave me alone for a little bit because I'm not having a good day. And it would last all of a minute and a half. And then everything that he was doing was more important than the time and space that I needed. And I didn't have anywhere else to go. So it's like, if I wanted to be in my bed, I'm in the same room with this man who's sitting a couple feet away from me, drinking shot after shot after shot, that wants to talk at me. So I had planned this trip with my brother because my grandmother's ashes came back into my possession. And we were supposed to have spread her ashes like some 15 years ago in her hometown. So I made the plan with my brother. We took the trip. At this point, I had lost my job that I had been at for also a decade. And it felt like, maybe this is the time, maybe this is the right opportunity for me to leave a lot of things that have been unhealthy for me, like the job and my now ex-boyfriend and the living situation. So it was a great trip because I was able to connect with my brother. We talked about a lot of things. We talked about like what I was going through. And then literally the day I come back from my trip, I had already texted my boyfriend, hey, this is when my plane arrives, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. He was not waiting up for me sober or anything. He was passed out on the floor with half of his body underneath the bed and the other half naked, sprawled across the floor. And I was like, there was just so many instances where I'm like, you can't be sober for anything. Like my birthday,
Right,
you have to have 4 shots before we leave the house to go somewhere. Like you won't meet me in the middle. That was literally the one thing that two things I asked for more than anything else. I want you to stop drinking. and I want us to get out of this house. And he made no progress on either of those things. So I remember sending my brother a picture of this man sprawled out on the floor, a picture of his bottle, and my brother had only just dropped me off at the house. And his response was, "Wow, I didn't think you were serious." And I'm like, "Yep, I'm unsurprised." So it was just years and years of that, coming home from an 8, 9 hour, sometimes even longer shift. And that would be what I would see, is a man who was either ready to fight me, was bumbling around drunk, doing things like changing the water in his fish tank, and it's already midnight, which means that if I want to go to sleep, I'm going to be listening to you almost falling over, crashing into things, making a lot of noise, singing, crying, whatever, along with the music that you have playing in your ears, which means I can't get rest for my opening shift that I have tomorrow after I just got home from a closing shift. So there was just no peace, no like space, no ability for me to relax when I came home. And it just felt like, everything he did had no consideration for me. And I'm not going to sit there and say like I was super considerate of him all the time, but the level of resentment that just kept like racking up and loading up, I just couldn't do it anymore. So at this point, my brother was no longer with his girlfriend, his ex, whatever, and he has his own house and an RV. Now, I thought he might let me stay in the house because I didn't think he'd want me in his RV, but he he didn't want me in the house with my cat. That would potentially destroy his furniture because my cats have only lived in that little room with us. Speaking of which, my other cat is still with him because he did not want to let her go. So I had to let go of our first cat together, which I regret all the time because I worry about how she's doing. And I know the last couple of times I saw her, she was not in the best condition. Like, he's let her claws grow out super long. She's gotten really small. I know she's 9 years old now, but I don't think he's taking the best care of her because he doesn't even take the best care of himself. So I had to choose to lose that battle. But anyway, my brother let me move into the RV, and I haven't looked back since. It was the best, worst experience of my life, and it is definitely something that I have grown from. And now that I am living in the RV, I am free of the toxic ex-boyfriend and all of the emotional, physical, and mental abuse that I went through. I'm just so grateful for where I am and for my brother who gave me the opportunity to finally get out of that house and live somewhere like a real human. Anyway, didn't mean to get emotional, but yeah, here's to 1 year free of the trap house. Thank you for listening.